First of all, thank you everyone from Farber in Southfield, Michigan, as well as Bicultural Hebrew Academy in Stamford, Connecticut. Thank you to Rav Binny, who's speaking to us from Efrat.
From Efrat.
From Efrat, and of course, Rav Binny is the Dean Rosh Yeshiva, founder of Yeshivat Oraita in Yerushalayim in the Old City. And he's joining us today to talk a little bit about tefillah. I'll let him introduce himself a little bit more. If you want to ask a question, please just put a touch on manage participants, and you should have a little thing that allows you to raise your hand, and then we'll interrupt and allow the question. Now I'm going to put everyone on mute, and except for Rav Binny, and Rav Binny will be spotlighted. Okay. Up, hold on, Rav Binny. Hold on. Hold on. I gotta unmute you. There you go. Go ahead.
Right, we good?
Good,
okay.
You're good.
Okay, so by the way, I'm just as a technical aside, I'm still getting used to Zoom. So if you raise your hand, Rabbi Israel, I guess you're hosting this. So if you see somebody has a question, feel free to interrupt me and say somebody has a question, because in a real class, that's what makes the class interesting when people have questions, okay? And worst comes to worst, I'll say, give me 1 more minute and then we'll get to it. But the truth is, the real value of this is in your questions, not in what I have to say. Fair enough? Okay, but we'll see if it works. So I wanted to share with you a topic that I actually think is really, it's got to be on a lot of people's minds here. I mean, the world has gone absolutely nuts. It's upside down. It's crazy, right? You feel like you're living in a movie. You know, if you watch Netflix, they keep pushing all these contagion and, plague zombie movies, because for some sick reason, somebody thinks that's what people want to watch. You don't need to watch it. You're in the movie. I mean, it's a little better than that. But so what is going on? And on a deeper level, one of the challenges in life is when you feel that there's nothing you can do. On the one hand, I have a good friend who's the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. And she sent me this blurb today. She basically said, like, my mother lived through a war in a ghetto, in a camp. All we have to do to fight the war is stay home and watch TV. Like, don't mess this up, right? This is not a big deal. On the other hand, it is a big deal. Like, first of all, you're sitting at home in a totally different reality. We're not doing the normal things we do. And it might be that for some of us, this is still interesting and curious. It's been a few days, a week. What's it going to be like when it's a month? What happens if this is 2 or 3 months? And what about people who are really struggling with this? I don't know if you're following the news, some of you, and what's going on in places like Italy. It's crazy there. I have a good friend who has a close friend in Italy. It's really scary, some of the things that they're sharing there, right? So what's your natural inclination? Like, what's the first thing that a Jew wants to do? And I'll give you an example. So we had a lot of students who we decided, we have a yeshiva here in Israel, in Yerushalayim. We have about 70 students. And about a week ago, we started to, what's today? Today's Wednesday, more than a week and a half ago, we kind of saw the writing on the wall, and we realized where things were headed. And we realized that we couldn't take responsibility for 70 kids overseas, 18, 19 years old, with no place to quarantine them if we needed to. So it basically said anybody who didn't have their own place for quarantine, better to go back to the States, be at home with your family, and then, come back when things kind of calm down. And people started to look for flights. And there's always the half of the group that gets it and they book flights, and the half of the group that wants to see. But within 2 or 3 days, everybody was trying to get it. Not because there was anything dangerous going on here. In fact, in my opinion, it's actually a little safer in Israel than it is in America, but that's just me, right? Just because you want to be with your family, you want to be with your parents, you want to hang out in your familiar surroundings. So you don't want to be in a dormitory, the shared bathroom and all that sort of thing, right? And there was one kid who, for whatever the reason, couldn't get a flight. And he finally managed to get a tentative flight out. And until he managed to get the flight, it was like 2 or 3 hours before the flight. And we had to get him like a cab, and he had to get to the airport. And he was pretty stressed. Is he going to make the flight? Are they going to let him on? Is somebody going to get infected that he knew and they're going to tell him he has corona? Who knows, right? And I said to him, just do me a favor. Because at this point, I wasn't with him. I was in a Friday, it was at night. And I said, just send me a text when you get in the cab. Send me a text when you get to the airport. Send me a text. Like, I know it sounds, I just want to know where you're at so I could, be sure you're okay. And he gets to the airport and there's this unbelievable line. It was a madhouse. He's got like less than 2 hours to make the flight. And this looks like a 5-hour line, right? And he's standing, there's nothing he can do. So what did he do? He's 18 years old. He grew up in a yeshiva high school, yeshiva day school. He's standing on the security line, right? And he basically says to me, I'll text you in a few minutes. I'm just going to say some Tehillim. He starts davening. He starts praying. Now, on the one hand, that's very powerful because it kind of suggests that whatever happens, it's really up to Hashem. And to really know, it's, God forbid somebody's sick. I'm sure, don't get nervous. That's not a coronavirus. Well, you wouldn't be nervous because you're online, but whatever, right? But on the one hand, somebody gets sick and it hits you. I mean, two of our students, some of you may actually know this person, so I won't mention names, but one of the first individuals in New York who had corona in the New York area was a Jewish fellow who I'm friendly with. He lives near my brother-in-law. Two of his sons, students at a right, one of them was this year, and we had to get him back in a hurry before everybody else left. And it hits you. Like he was put into a coma. He was intubated. It's pretty scary. Back then, we didn't sort of have a bigger picture of what was really going on. And so the whole yeshiva started davening. And it's powerful. It really gets you. But then you walk out of shul and you start to ask yourself some questions, right? Put aside for the moment why I have to go to shul to daven anyway. Leave that aside, right? But what is it that we're trying to do? I mean, we're asking God to heal this person. So again, it's a high level to know that whether this person gets healed or not is up to Hashem. But on the other hand, I have to ask God to heal this person. Doesn't Hashem know that I want him to be healed? Right? I mean, I remember many, many years ago, I came to Israel when I was 18. I went to learn in a yeshiva. I thought I was just coming for a year. By the way, as an aside, highly recommended. Whatever and wherever you go is a separate question. I cannot recommend enough taking a year after your high school experience to be in Israel, to learn, to grow. No tests, no papers, no homework. It's a phenomenal experience, right? Corona notwithstanding, right? And that's what I did. I went to a place called Gush, and I thought I was coming back afterwards. I fell in love with the country. I just couldn't leave. I decided to stay a second year learning in yeshiva. And after that, I decided I was going to stay in Israel. And I thought if I'm going to stay in Israel, I should do the right thing, at least from my perspective. So I joined the army. I was in the army for about 4.5 years, became a company commander. And I can remember many, many instances where there was no other resort for me but to daven, but to pray, right? I'll give you one great example, okay? This was like, I don't know, my first or second Miluim reserve duty. I was finished with regular army, and we were stationed in a place called Ramallah. And this was a hot zone at the time. It was during the first Intifada, right? Which was like sort of an Arab uprising of sorts. And we had, Miluim reserve duty is much more difficult than regular army in certain ways because you're kind of in civilian life, and all of a sudden they grab you and you have to go in for 3-4 weeks and put on these green pajamas and do all the stuff and then go back to your life. So it's very hard to kind of turn it on and off. And so we're in Miluim in Ramallah, and every couple of days, one of these guys would show up on our base. They call them Shabaknikim, like sort of the Israeli kind of some type of a secret service, security services. These guys were unbelievable. I mean, they looked like Arabs. They smelled like Arabs. I don't know what the smell of an Arab is different from a Jew, but they claim these are expert units that actually cultures smell differently. Japanese can tell when you're a Westerner because our diet is different. We eat much more red meat. They eat more fish. They smell different. Dogs can tell this. So he dressed Arabic. He spoke perfect Arabic. He looked Arabic. Like if you didn't know any better, you would assume he was Arab, right? And he would show up on the base with a special identity card. And so they would let him onto the base. And he was basically looking for the officer on duty. And he would basically tell you, there was a terrorist that was hiding someplace. They knew where he was. They had to go in and get him. And they needed an army unit to go with them to get him. And I had this experience a few times. So this particular day, the same thing happened. They found I was the officer on duty that day. And one of these guys shows up and they send him my way and he finds me. And he gives me a piece of paper. And the piece of paper has a photo of a guy with a brief bio, right? Basically, they had located this serious terrorist who was responsible for a number of bus bombings, terrorist events, whatever they were, murdered some people. And they knew for sure that he was going to be in a certain house that night in Ramallah. And they wanted us to go in and get him, right? So we took I told the Ready Alert squad, sort of gave them a briefing and told them, like, there's always 6 to 8 guys who are, so sleep on their uniforms. They're ready for an emergency. Tonight, we're going into Ramallah in the middle of the night. Okay. So about 1 o'clock in the morning, I wake everybody up. We get on our gear. We get into our Jeeps and we head into Ramallah. Generally speaking, Arab cities are like ghost towns at night. They have, in certain ways, much healthier living than we do. They go to sleep early, they wake up early. Right, 5 in the morning in Ramallah is party time. Everybody's awake. They were getting ready for work. But at 1 o'clock in the morning, it's a ghost town. They even turn the street lights out. Now, you don't take your Jeeps right up to the house that they've determined he's in, because then they'll hear you. So you park the Jeeps like, I don't know, a kilometer away, a mile away. And 2 drivers stay with the 2 Jeeps, and we kind of go on foot, to this house. Now, my job technically is to navigate us to the house, but this guy knew Ramallah back and forward, and I've done this a few times, and I know, like, he doesn't need me to nav. So I'd taken a look at the map, but I hadn't really learned the navigation. And sure enough, he knows where we're going. And then I see sort of where the house is, he points it out to me. And basically the way it works is my job is to take my units around the house, make sure it's safe, accompany him in. We're supposed to identify this guy with him. He interrogates him for a few minutes. They do a search on the house. If they find something, weapons, whatever, then we take him back, but we call the Jeeps. The Jeeps come rolling up and we're out of there. The whole thing is supposed to take 10 minutes tops, right? Before anybody has a chance to get wise. So we're walking up to these houses from the side and I see that we have a problem because the house was actually one of a row of houses. They were like sort of low, flat, 2-story homes. And on the back of these houses, there was a cliff. And the cliff dropped down like, I don't know, 150 feet, 200 feet into a vineyard, right? Which was totally dark. And the problem was that because it was connected to other houses, there was no way to surround the house. Not only that, but we were approaching from the side and I saw that there were these little balconies on the back of houses. So I said to this Shabaknik, listen, we have a problem. A, we don't have enough manpower to surround this house, right? B, there's a little balcony in the back. You can bet your bottom dollar, if this guy's as good as you think he is, he's got an escape plan. As soon as he hears us banging on the door, he'll be on that balcony. I'm sure there's a rope ladder or a rope. He'll be down into that vineyard. You'll never get him. We don't have enough men to surround and go down into the vineyard and split up our forces. And we don't have the time to call base and try to hustle up another 20 guys. By the time that happens, they'll hear us, he'll escape, whatever. Some of these homes have like holes in between the homes so he can escape to another house. The only way to do this, right? So I said to him, the only way to do this is one of us has to go up on the roof and drop down into the balcony. And that way, if we bang on the door and he shoots out the back, we'll be on the balcony and we'll catch him. Okay. He thinks that's a good idea, fine. We get to the house and I'm sort of taking a look at who I've got with me and how I'm going to divide. And I realize I have another problem because this is the reserves, right? This is not regular army. These guys are all like me, but this was my second year as an officer in the reserves. I was 26, 27. These guys were like 40, 35. They were all, let's just say they hadn't seen the color of their socks in a while. Nobody was climbing up on that roof. They were all over it. That's just the luck of the draw of who happened to be in my unit that night. I realized there's no way they're going to get up without making noise. So I said, what, I'll go up on the roof. It's not really the way you're supposed to operate. The officer's supposed to go in first. I'll go up on the roof, but I do know I have an experienced sergeant. He'll go in with you in the door, and I'll be on the back of the balcony. Okay, great, easy. So I managed to get up on the roof. I climbed up a pipe, and I told this guy, just be careful. Wait 5 minutes, because I got to go see the balcony and drop down into it and figure it out. And, you don't want to bang on the door and have this guy run out the back, and I'm still on the roof. I'm not shooting somebody in the back, He says, en baya, no problem. Whenever an Israeli says to you, en baya, no problem, usually means you have a problem, but okay. So I'm up on the roof. I see this balcony. What looked like a great idea from 100 feet away now seems like a ridiculous thing to do. It's this narrow balcony, right? It's a little sort of narrower than me. And I've got to lower myself off the roof. And I get down, I'm hanging onto the roof. I've got all my gear on. My gun is over my back, my helmet, my webbing, all the stuff that you carry, the heavy shachpatza, what's a flak vest, right? And I'm trying to figure out how to drop, because I could drop into this roof. If I get it wrong, I could hit the back and fall backwards, and I'll go 200 feet down into a cliff. So I'm freaking out. How am I going to get to this balcony, right? My feet are still about, 4 feet off the ground. Now, 4 feet is not a big deal. Like if you were standing on a table and had to jump down, it's not a big deal. But if you're hanging from a roof backwards and you've got to drop 4 feet into a narrow balcony space, it was like a laundry balcony. It wasn't like a proper sit on a balcony. You're like a little nervous, and I'm hanging there. There was this big double door glass window in front of me. All of a sudden, when I'm just getting over the roof and hanging there, I hear this bang on the door, and the guy says, "Iftach al-bab, iftach al-bab," like open the door. And I know in like 5 seconds they're gonna bash in the door if somebody doesn't get there. Sure enough, in a second, the lights go on in the living room. They're breaking in the front door. Curtains part in front of this big glass window. Thank God the doors opened in, because if they would have opened out, I wouldn't be here talking to you. And they're standing opposite me, like right below my face, is the face of the guy whose picture is on the piece of paper in my pocket. And I'm hanging there, like in between heaven and earth. He looks at me, I look at him. Now, what do you do? Like, what do you do? Now, in the movies, this would be no problem. In the movies, I'd have my gun over my shoulder. I'd be hanging from one arm. There'd be fantastic music, and I'd be swinging in, and I'd flick him to the side as I did a somersault into the room, spraying, But in real life, my gun's over my back. My fingers are now digging into the cement above me, and there's nothing I can do. There is nothing I can do. He looks at me. I look at him. I say to him, "Alan," like, "Hello." And by some miracle, he shuts the doors. To this day, I don't know why he did that. All he had to do was push me, and I wouldn't be here. I guarantee you. And I'm still here. Now, you can imagine, in the 3 seconds that I'm hanging there, you have to decide what to do. What do? You do what's a natural instinct for you. So what could you do? You can't fight. You're holding onto the roof. You can't run. You can't hide. You can't surrender. There's nothing to do except to pray. And it's this powerful prayer. I can't even begin to describe the power of that prayer. Like, it seems funny now, but I'm telling you, unbelievable prayer. It starts with the word, "Ah!" Like, oh God. And by some miracle, it worked. And then you get down, and they caught him, and we interrogated him, and we put him in a Jeep, and we took him to base, and he had killed children. I mean, it was a serious thing. And after that, it was basically out of my hands. That was my job. But I had a chance to talk to the Shabaknik later and gave him a piece of my mind, and he didn't wait longer. And then the dust settles, you start to think, like, what is it that I'm doing? Like, what is that? To pray, to ask God, to what? To save me, to help me. What, Hashem doesn't know what I want? I have to tell him? And by the way, who put me on that position in the beginning, in the first place? God. So if you believe, as I do, that Hashem runs the world, right? I have to say, by the way, what's going on today must be pretty scary if Hashem doesn't run the world. It's just confusing if he does. So then what's the point of prayer? What is it we're trying to do? Most people go into a tefillah, a prayer experience, kind of thinking that I want to try to change God's mind, right? Somebody's sick. Oh God, please change your mind. Let's make him healthy. But that's ridiculous. So what is the purpose of tefillah? So I want to share with you an idea that comes from Rav Kook. Rav Kook was the first chief rabbi of Israel before it was a state. He was a student of the Netziv, Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, who was the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the yeshiva in Volozhin, a tremendous Torah scholar, credited by many with being one of the sort of the visionaries who drove the enterprise of Zionism and the birth of the state of Israel. And he has some magnificent works. And one of them is actually based on his commentary on the Talmud in the Enayah, a commentary on the Sidur called the Olat Ariyah, and this comes from there. He makes a really interesting point. What exactly is prayer? What is it? Now, before we talk about what prayer is, we have to talk about what it's not, okay? If you look up the word prayer in a dictionary, and you can do this, you're all on your laptops, you can, sort of click aside and see that I'm right. The Oxford Dictionary finds prayer as to entreat or to beg, right? In fact, has anybody here, if you've ever seen a praying mantis, raise your hands. Has anybody ever seen a praying mantis? Do you know what a praying mantis looks like? You know why they call it praying mantis? Yeah, so on. You know why they call it praying mantis? Because it looks like it's begging. Now, that is not a Jewish notion of prayer, right? In fact, if you think about it, I'm not an expert on Christianity, but my sense is that the Christian world views that as a form of prayer. And, I am nothing, you are God, I throw myself before the mercy of the court, oh, please change your mind. But if we believe that Hashem runs the world, then Hashem knows everything that's going to happen. And if the whole point of it, if the only point of tefillah is to try to get God to change their mind, well, then it doesn't seem to work that well. I mean, I don't know. There must have been hundreds of thousands of people praying for the Lubavitcher Rebbe not to pass away 20 years ago. As far as I know, he passed away. He was a tremendous Torah scholar and a righteous person, tzaddik. So there must be something else to tefillah. So what is tefillah? Tefillah is the Jewish word for prayer. We're going to use the word tefillah or tadaven, right? So what is tefillah? So, tefillah, palel, is related to the root nafal, which means to fall. In fact, Rav Shimshon Rav Hirsch points out that when Rachel, Yaakov's wife, names her surrogate son Naphtali, she says, Naftulei Elokim niftalti. And what that means, according to many commentaries, is I have struggled the struggles of God. Rachel struggled because she couldn't have children. And therefore, litpalel on a certain level is to struggle, right? To struggle. Now I'll tell you something else, right? In fact, that's what falling is all about. You fall down, you get up again. You fall down, you get up again, and eventually you walk, right? On a deeper level, okay, I assume that in your schools, you study Hebrew to some degree, right? So if you, let me see if I can do, I want to play with this for a second, hang on. I can see some of you, hang on. Yeah, okay. So there are 7 different ways to conjugate a verb in Hebrew, okay? I can say Paul, Hual, Piel, Hitpael. I could say Lavashti, I wore a sweatshirt. I can say Hitlabashti, I dressed myself in a sweatshirt. That's a different form, right? I could say Yoshafti, I sat down. I could say Hit Yoshafti, I sat myself down. That's something I do to and for myself. In Hebrew, we don't say Palalti. We say Hit Palalti. Because tefillah is the reflexive, it's something I'm doing to and for myself. I'm not actually changing God, I'm changing myself. Now, how does that work? Right? Now it gets interesting. So Yaakov Avinu is on his deathbed, and Yosef comes to see him. Now remember that Yosef was Yaakov's beloved son, and you all know the story. He went missing. And in fact, when the brothers came back, they had taken Yosef's technicolor coat, which of course Yaakov would recognize. They dipped it in animal's blood so that they could pretend that he'd been murdered by an animal. And they throw it down before Yaakov, their father, and say, Hakerna, do you recognize whose this is? Basically, they can't face him. They can't say to him something that's so blatantly false, knowing what they did, that they sold him into slavery or whatever else happened there. And it says that Yaakov looks at it and he understands it's his sons, but it says, Vayima'ain lihitnachem, he cannot be comforted, right? Because he doesn't know what happened to him. In fact, I'll tell you just as an aside, I have a close friend, Zach Baumel, maybe some of you have heard his name. He was missing in action in the Battle of Sultan Yaakov since 1982. Last year, finally, after 30 years, they finally returned his body. All those years, his parents never knew what happened to him. I got close to his parents over the years because Zach and I were in the dorms together at Gush in my yeshiva, and we got close. And Yonah Baumel, his father, remember his son is missing for almost 30 years, once told me that the most powerful pasuk, the most powerful verse for him in the entire Torah was that pasuk, that Yaakov cannot be comforted. He says, I understand why Yaakov cannot be comforted, because he had no closure. So one day, Yaakov discovers that Yosef is alive. And he has a chance to see his beloved son again, and he goes down to Egypt. And some 22 years later, Yaakov is on his deathbed, right? He gets sick. Now, interestingly enough, this is the first time in the Torah that a person ever gets sick. We never see a person get sick until that moment. The Medrash, rabbinic tradition, says a person never was sick before this, but it's almost as though God gives Yaakov a gift of having a sickness at the end so that he can know he's dying, so he gets a chance. This time you'll have a chance to say goodbye. So Yosef comes to see him. It's a really powerful moment. And one of the things that Yaakov says to Yosef is, Ra'o fanecha lo pilalti. I never palelled. There's that same word, the root of lehit palel. I never palelled I would ever see your face again. So Rashi, super commentary on the Torah, Rashi says, what does that mean? I never palelled that I would ever see you again. Lo mil'ani libi lachshov ki arech hashuv. I did not fill my heart with the possibility that I didn't imagine I would see you again. I didn't wake up this morning wishing to see you, dreaming to see you, because I thought you were dead. So what a gift that Hashem gave me that I never imagined I would get. So if palel, according to Rashi, is to dream, to wish, to want, to imagine, then to lehit palel, tefillah, davening, is to struggle with what we imagine, with what we want. That's what tefillah is, says Rav Kook. At its base level, it's about struggling with what we want. That's where it starts. Now, this is interesting. What is it that we want? You know, what you want is who you are. And wanting is somewhat of a gift, right? You can't, it's hard to define why we want different things. You know, if I want to do a jam session, play some guitar. So I'll ask my son, Yonatan, you want to jam? And he'll say, sure. And he'll take his guitar and I'll take mine and we'll jam. But if I asked my daughter, Mayan, do you want to play guitar? She'd look at me like I was an idiot. Because to her, a guitar is just firewood. On the other hand, if I said, would you love to paint? Right? So my daughter loves to draw. My son would look at it like me. You know, he can draw stick figures. We want different things. We're good at different things. Right? And what we want is really who we are. Do we ever stop to think about what we want? Is what we want what we should want? Is what we want what we could want? Do we want what we want? Does Hashem want us to want what we want? Lehit palel is to struggle with what we want. Now, I'll tell you one more thing, two more things. And then we'll open up the floor if anybody has any questions. So, if what you want is who you are, right? It's interesting that Judaism, Hasidus, like the Hasidic movement, believed that Hashem created the world in such a way that in order for something to come into the world, someone has to want. Wanting is the way that we bring things into the world. I'll give you an example. You all know about 9/11, that the terrorists flew planes and took down the Twin Towers in, was 2001, right? Why was there a World Trade Center to begin with? Because some architect sitting at his breakfast table in the 1960s, 70s, wanted to build it, right? On the other hand, why is there no Beit HaMikdash today? Why is there no temple? You know why? Because we don't want it enough. In fact, most people don't even know what it means. Don't even know why we need a temple. And I'm not debating that topic right now, but because we don't want it, it doesn't come into the world. So wanting something is the vehicle whereby we bring things into the world, right? And that's because wanting things changes who we are. How do we change in Tefillah? We change because we focus and think about what we want. And I want to tell you, there are three questions that a person should ask themselves every day, maybe even every minute of every day. The first question is, what do I want? It's amazing how many people don't stop to think what they want. Like, what do you really want in this world, right? Let's say somebody, you had a genie in a bottle and the genie popped out and he said, I'm going to give you one wish. What do you want, right? Let's say a kid says, well, I want, I want a new car. Is that a good thing to want or a bad thing to want, right? Another person says, I want to learn the entire Talmud. I want to know the entire Talmud. Is that a good thing or a bad thing to want? So it's interesting that most people think one is objectively good and one isn't. It's not true. Because the next question is, why do I want it? If you want a car, because you know there are a lot of old people confined to their homes and they have no way of getting food, and you want to get a car so that you can go to the market every day and bring food to old people, then that becomes a holy car, and that's a holy thing to want. But if you want to learn all the Talmud because then it'll make you look good and you'll get to show off, that's a terrible reason to want to know the Talmud. That's not going to be holy at all. So the first question is, what do I want? But the second question is, why do I want it? Why do I really want it? You know what the third question is? This is the tough one. Does Hashem want me to want it? If I want something, and I think I want it for good reasons, but deep down I know this isn't necessarily something that Hashem wants me to want. You know? I don't know, my friend got an iPad, and I really want that iPad. And you know why I want that iPad? Because then I can listen to shiurim, I can listen to classes of Torah, great. But it's not your iPad. And if it's not your iPad and Hashem gave it to him, maybe Hashem doesn't want you to want it. And that's why one of the 10 commandments, lo tachmod, you're not supposed to covet something, want something that someone else wants, right? And I will tell you one last thing, and then we'll open up the floor. So why do we want different things? Why is it that one person, you know, my daughter was an officer in an elite intelligence unit called the 8200. To this day, I have very little idea of what she did, maybe a very little idea. I'm a little in awe of what she did. But one of the interesting things about that Army unit is when you finish that, especially if you're an officer, you're made, you're set. In fact, many of these people get recruited out of the Army. They don't even go to college because the high-tech companies know how good they are. It's very hard to get into this unit. So they get a job, and then if they last in the job for 2 years, the company will give them college for free. Like, it's an amazing thing. And my daughter finished the Army. She's in the Army for 4.5 years or 4 years or whatever it was, 3.5 years. And she could have had any job she wanted, but she didn't want any of them. She decided she wanted to be a doctor. And I said to her, like, really? You want to go to medical school? Like, it's 7 years. And then you have to specialize. It could be 5 or 6 years. You want to have kids. You know, she was already, you know, sort of, you know, married. Like, is that? She looked at me, she said, but I don't want anything else. That's what I really want to do. I said, okay, if that's what you want. And where does that come from? I promise you that didn't come to my house. She didn't grow up in my house wanting to become a doctor. That was a gift Hashem gave her. What you really want, if it's really what you want and you believe it's a good thing and it's what Hashem wants you to want, then that's a gift Hashem gave you. You know, there's a Gemara, the Talmud says that if a person says to you, Yagati, velo matzati, I worked really hard, I tried really hard, I didn't succeed, don't believe him. Nobody ever worked hard without achieving something. If somebody says, I didn't work at all, look what I built this great business, I didn't work at all, don't believe him either. Because nothing serious ever comes along unless somebody worked at it. Yagati umatzati. A person says, I worked really hard, right? Yagea kapecha, that means to work hard, right? And I did it, that person you can believe. Okay. So Rav Dessler, the author of the Michtav Meliyahu, he asked a great question. He says the verb is wrong. It shouldn't say matzati. Matzati means I found it. It should say yagati v'itzlachti, I succeeded, yagati v'asiti, I did it, right? Matzati, to find something, is like, I didn't do anything for it. So that's the wrong verb. You know, you walk down the street, you find a wallet, you didn't work for it. So Rav Dessler says, you know why that is? Because when you finish all the work, and you accomplish something, and you think, look what I did, take a pause and ask yourself, why did I do all this work? I did all this work because I wanted to do all this work. Where did that wanting come from? That was a gift. If I can figure out what I really want, and I'm sure it's a good thing, know that that is a gift that Hashem gives me. And I have a responsibility to decide what to do with that gift. If you love to play guitar and it's a gift Hashem gave you, then you owe it to the world to become the best guitar player you can be, right? And so on and so forth. So just to summarize, that's a little bit of food for thought. Tefillah is not prayer, because prayer means to beg to change God's mind, right? Tefillah is not about prayer. Tefillah is about struggling with what we want. There are 3 questions we can ask ourselves every day. What do I want? Why do I want it? Does Hashem want me to want it, right? And if I can figure out what I really want, then tefillah, the process of struggling with what that is and what I do with it, is what changes me. And I'll just end with a story and any questions. So I had a good friend. I'm going to change his name because in case anybody gets to Gush Etzion or thereabouts and runs into him, he was in a different army unit back in the first Lebanon War. And they were headed up the coast towards Beirut, the capital of Lebanon, going through Rashidia, Tzur, Tzidon. And his unit, he was in a tank unit. And his unit ran into Syrian commandos and whatever armored corps somewhere outside of Rashidia. And the unit that they ran into, the tank commander, who was the commander of this fellow's tank, we'll call him Kobe, okay? So the tank commander realized that they were in trouble because he saw a certain type of armored personnel carrier called a BMP-1. And anybody who was in the armored corps back then knew that the BMP-1 these were Syrian armored command cars, carried an anti-tank missile called a Sagar. Sagar was a nasty little Russian toy. It would basically blow a hole in the side of our tanks. We couldn't resist the armor. Our armor wasn't thick enough to stop it. It was like the newest weapon in the Middle East. And once it blew a hole in the tank, it would shoot a stream of lead at like 4,000 degrees, right? It basically exploded everything it touched. And we had been trained to know that in our tanks, we couldn't resist this. So if you couldn't get them first and you were sure they were going to hit you, you had to abandon tank, right? Because it takes like, 7 or 8 seconds for it to get to you. So I guess this tank commander realized they weren't going to make it, so he gave the order to abandon tank. Now, tank crews practice this again and again. A good tank crew can get out of a tank in about 3 seconds, right? Kobe was the gunner. The gunner sits in the belly of the tank. He can't get out until the commander standing behind him in the turret gets out. He didn't make it. He was burned, 80% of his body, 3rd-degree burns. 3rd-degree burns, the worst kind of burns you can imagine. They're worse than the type of burn you get in the kitchen that you need first aid. They're worse than 2nd-degree burns with blisters and infections, and that goes to the hospital. This is like the body is burned basically down to the bone. Now, on the one hand, it's easier because all your nerve endings are destroyed, so you don't feel pain. On the other hand, the rehabilitative process is one of the most difficult and painful in modern medicine. Most people who die from these type of burns die from dehydration because it sucks all the water out of the body. He was one of, just so you understand what 80% of the body burned is, the head is 15%. So he was like a matchstick man. So a few of us managed to get away a couple weeks later. We made it up to Rambam Hospital in Haifa, which is where the burn center is at the time. I had never been in a place like that. It's a horrendous place to visit. There's a big sign, under age 16, not allowed. And we understood why as soon as we got upstairs. The nurse told us go down the hall, go up the elevator to 2nd floor. We come out. It's like something out of Gehenna. I mean, just an inferno. There were hundreds of patients. They were in beds everywhere. They had moved away the nurses' stations. This was in the middle of a war. The most common injuries are burns. We didn't know where to go, how to find him. So we see some fellow. He's got a white, doctor's thing out on a stethoscope, and he's looking at a chart, and he's standing next to a patient. And one of us went over to him, right, just to, be able to figure out where this friend of ours, where Kobe was, right? And I'm looking at this patient in the bed, and I'm trying not to look at him, but I could not look at him. His face is still in my head 30 years later. And I realized he's trying to say something, but he couldn't speak because his vocal cords are burned, right? And after a couple of seconds, I finally get what he's saying. He says, Ze'ani, it's me. Now, there were 5 of us. 2 of these guys were his closest friends. None of us recognized him. And we went all the way up there to do Bikur Cholim, to visit a person who was sick. And basically what we did was we told him, you're so burned, we can't even recognize you, right? We didn't even know what to say. If you can go a day without appreciating what a gift it is that we're healthy, especially with everything going on today, then something's wrong. Like, that's how we should start. What a gift to be sitting in a home, isolated and healthy. But if we can go a day without appreciating that there are people who are suffering, there are people who are sick all over the world, then something's really wrong. And the process of taking a moment, when we get to the bracha of Rafa'inu in the Shemona Esrei, of taking a moment to appreciate that there are people who are not healthy, that actually makes me a better person. That changes me. There is a list of 13 things that we should want, right? We should want healthy relationships. We should want that people should be healthy. We should want a place where Jews can come together, where the world can come together. We should want peace. And the list of those 13 things is basically the foundation of the Shemona Esrei, of the Amidah, of the silent prayer that we offer. Because the list of those 13 things, the Jewish people says, if you think about these things and you practice wanting them, you become a better human being. And when each of us becomes a better human being, the world becomes a better place and the recipe changes. So that's the short version of one way of understanding tefillah. I think I've talked long enough and you've been great if you're listening. At least do I see. So maybe I'll just stop here and just see if you guys have any questions about tefillah, about prayer, Judaism in general. All yours, with pleasure.
Amazing, Rabbi. Amazing. Thank you so, so much.
Sure.
They have class, I know, in a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Are there any quickie questions? It's a lot to take in. All right, while you're thinking about if you have a quickie question, let's maybe just say a Misha Berach together. Does everyone see that? Do you see that?
Oh, sure. Cool. All right.
Anyone want to read for us? Any student able to unmute him or herself to read it for us, or no? No volunteers?
I'm seeing a couple questions, by the way. I don't know if you have time for them, but.
Okay, we'll do it right after. Misha Berach Avoteinu Avraham Yitzhak Yaakov Moshe V'Aaron David Ushlomo V'Imotenu Sar Rivka Rachel Leah Hu Yivarech Et HaCholim. You can think about all of the
Eliezer Yitzhak ben
who
Rivka,
have the virus.
Laura bat Gittel, Chaim ben Chana.
Ba'avur she'anachnu mitpalelim lirpotam. Yisrael HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yimalei Rachamim Aleihem Lahachlimam Ilpotam Lahachazikam Lahachyotam Yishlach Lahem Mehera Refuah Shlema Min HaShamayim Im Kol Chulei Yisrael Refuah Nefesh Refuah Haguf Hashta Ba'agala Ubizman Karev Amen.
Amen.
It's up to the principals if you want to come online, just unmute yourselves. I'm unmuting everyone. Actually, principals are going to have to unmute themselves and decide to tell them to go to their next class.
We have about we have a few minutes before the bicultural kids have to go to class.
Okay.
Our next class starts in 1 minute. If people have a quick question or want to stay for an extra minute, they can.
So somebody asked the question here, who is this? Yafa Magie is asking, how would you define true want? I think true want, it's a good question. You know,
fulfilled your mission.
If Hashem created the world, right, then the ultimate ratzon, the ultimate want is what Hashem wants. Right? In other words, we're living in a time. If you would have asked me 2-3 weeks ago, a month ago, how long is a month? It's nothing. If you would have asked me 3-4.
Oops.
My parents are coming over. And then we found out, you know what? That's not going to happen. My parents actually called me this morning and they said they're 85 years old. Thank God they're healthy. And they said, you know what? We're going to be smart. We're not going to come to you for Seder. And they're going to do their own Seder at home. In the 56 years, or let's say 50 years that I can remember, I do not ever remember my parents doing a Seder on their own. They're going to do that this year. Clearly, Hashem wants something different. The true want is what Hashem wants. That's why, if I can align my want with what Hashem wants, Talmud says, "Aseh ritzo no ritzoncha." Can I make Hashem's will my want? In other words, if I think that Hashem wants the world to experience Shabbat, Hashem wants us to take a pause, Hashem wants us to slow down, then one of the things that I can decide to do is I want to actually want that. In other words, I'm going to keep Shabbat because I believe that's what Hashem wants me, but I don't want to just keep Shabbat. I want to celebrate Shabbat. Celebrating Shabbat is because I want it. I can't wait for Shabbat. If I want what Hashem wants me to want, then I'll live a better life. Does that make sense? What else? Does somebody else have a question? Ooh, what is the power of Tehillim? Oh, that's a good question. Okay, look, I'll give you the short version. This is like, a series of classes. but I'll give you the short version. They're actually, according to Jewish tradition, different authors of Tehillim. There are 3 different approaches to mitzvot. One of them is the mystical approach to mitzvot, which means that when we do anything, it has an enormous impact beyond our ability to understand, right? In other words, if a person puts on a pair of tefillin, or somebody lights Shabbat candles, to us, it's just lighting 2 candles. But actually, when you light candles, because you want to bring light into the home and pause and stop creating, and fire is the symbol of creation, you're actually having an impact that's beyond our comprehension. When I wrap myself in a pair of tefillin, there's something going on physiologically that's beyond my comprehension. When I choose, let's say, for example, to eat something unkosher from a carnivorous animal, an animal that is cruel if it eats other animals, as opposed to, let's say, the animals that we eat if we're kosher, which are herbivores and vegetarian, I'm taking a different energy into me. Tehillim was written by authors who were just so beyond our level, David HaMelech, for example, King David, that they somehow imbued those words with the power to impact us and to have an impact on the world. And that's why when people say Tehillim together, it's not about sort of, asking God to do something. It's about collectively changing something, impacting something. Now, the more we think about what we're saying, like I'll give you an example. One of the Tehillim, one of the Psalms that we say on Shabbat morning, which always gets to me, it says, Karov Hashem lenishbarei lev. Hashem is close to the brokenhearted, right? And when I read that line, it's not a history book. It's not telling me that so I would know that. It's designed to make me think when I walk through the streets and I see a homeless person, or I see someone who's in pain, even if it's your friend and his girlfriend broke up with him, know that person, his heart is open. He has the ability to connect to Hashem in a deeper way, and take that seriously. Think about that now. Thinking about that and appreciating such people, and pausing and being sensitive to them, that makes me a better human being. And every time a human being becomes a better human being, the world becomes a better place, and that impacts us. And there is no recipe in Judaism like Tehillim to do that. So that's a short version. By the way, you guys have a gift that I didn't have when I was your age, because the greatest Torah scholar alive in the world today, anybody know who that rabbi is? Rabbeinu Google. You can ask a question like that. What is the power of Tehillim? And see what you find on Google. And if you keep looking, you'll find something that really speaks to you. The greatest thing about the age that we're living in and the time that you have, Hashem's given us all time. It's the most valuable thing we have in this world. Use it well.
Rabbi Freedman, thank you so much. Thank you to Bicultural Hebrew Academy and also to Farber. If you have further question, I'm certain that you can forward it to Rabbi Trencher or Rabbi Stein.
Sure.
To Rav Binny. Rav Binny, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Everyone, wash your hands, stay safe, stay healthy, and be well. Refuah Shlema to all the cholim.
Thank you so
stay well,
much
everybody.
for
It was
hosting
really
this.
nice to learn Torah with you. Hope to do it again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
No
And
problem.
great being together with the bicultural students.